You have lost your participation points for the
Detention.
That's okay with me.
No, actually, punishment sit down.
Are you going to be late as a teacher? Yeah. Are you going to be late when you're teaching? Oh. So you're going to write the ballot why you put it online so when they come in they can just go into the class folder and get their Alright,
Okay. Hello, class. Welcome back from break. I'm sure we're all excited to be back here. So as you know, we are finishing up our unit on the Cold War, and so I thought to wrap this unit up, we would end it with a very fascinating tale that takes place more on the sidelines of the Cold War. Not really a major event, but I still think it's very worth noting just because it's fascinating and very funny. So today's lecture is going to be taking place in Stockholm, Sweden in 1981. So during this time in Sweden, it was a very intense time because right across from them was this mysterious monster that is the Soviet Union. And in Sweden and in Swedish schools at the time, there were maps of Western Europe. And on the maps, there would be details, there would be roads and small towns, very colorful. But then across the Baltic Sea, there would just be blank white on the map. There was this mysterious nothingness. And the only thing separating Sweden from the Soviet Union was 140 miles of water. And so because of this enigma, Sweden always considered the Soviet Union its greatest threat. And they were in fear of a nuclear war almost daily. So now we're in October in 1981. And one day a fisherman is checking on his nets in the sea. And he sees this enormous Russian submarine. So he calls the Navy. And the next thing you know, Sweden is waking up to a Soviet sub beached on its shores. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, what the North is happening? And so it's important to note that Sweden has not been in a war for a very long time. The last war that they were involved in was the Napoleon Wars. And that was early 1800s. So it's been about well over 150 years since they were involved in anything. And so I guess that explains why the military's reaction to it was kind of naive, because what ended up happening was the military sent a few guys to kind of just knock on the submarine, or just they asked very kindly, hey, can we take a look in there? But the people in the submarine were like, no, you cannot take a look in here. So they're like, oh, okay. But Sweden physicists were very, very clever. And so what they did instead was they got a small boat to basically park beside the submarine. And through measurements, they were able to discover that the submarine was in fact carrying nuclear weapons. And every country has defining moments in its own history. Like in America, we have the Kennedy murders, we have the 9/11 attacks. And this was one of the defining moments for Sweden. Because this was like, hey, this is real. This could be a war. But what ended up happening was the Soviet sub-commander, they were like, hey, all of our navigation systems malfunctioned at once. We got lost. This was a mistake. So Sweden was like, okay, cool. And so they just escorted them out of their waters into international waters, and then they left. But Sweden was left very shook after that. And they realized they needed to be more vigilant with their defense. And so they took a look at their vast coastline. As you can see, it's over 1,000 miles long on your map. And they thought, how can we protect all this? How can we patrol all of this? And so the most obvious mode of defense for them was through sound, because sound travels really well through water. And so they got these devices called a hydrophone. Now, a hydrophone is just it's a device that can listen and record noise underwater. And so they hung them on their buoys. And Swedish politicians assured the people that once they had these bad boys in there, they would be able to tackle any problem that came their way. Bada bing, bada boom, problem solved, and Sweden was able to be at peace. That is until 1982, people started seeing periscopes. popping out of the water. Now, a periscope is it's like a telescope that's attached to a submarine. But people started seeing these popping out of the water. And so this time, Sweden sent a fleet of ships with big metal nets to block the exit of the harbor. And then they sent helicopters with hydrophones attached to them to dip into the water and to listen for the sound of a submarine. Now, before long, these hydrophones picked up the noise of the submarine, and then the helicopter would release a bomb, and then it would explode. And then the military would wait to see if there are any damages or see any evidence of a Soviet sub. But nothing ever emerged from the waters. And so this cycle continued through the 1980s. There would be these submarine chases. Like all of a sudden along the coast, there'd be the military would sound a siren, and then there'd be helicopters followed by bombs. But there was no real evidence of the Soviet sub in their waters. Now, when the Swedes were sure that they were encountering a Soviet sub, the hydrophones would always pick up this particular noise. Now, this was called a typical noise because it was believed to be the noise that a Soviet sub would make. So whenever the Soviets, or whenever the Swedish military would pick up this noise, it meant it was a 100% encounter with a Soviet sub. And no one but the military knew what this noise was. It was very classified, very top secret information. But for years, the hydrophones were picking up this particular noise. Then we get to 1989. The Berlin Wall falls, the Iron Curtain falls. The world is changing, and all these places that were once inaccessible were suddenly now open. But something strange was still going on in Sweden. The Swedish military were still reporting the noises that Soviet subs were picking up in their waters. They were still reporting the incidents, and there are about 20 to 30 incidents happening every year at this point. And it got so bad by 1994, the Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt got so fed up that he sent an angry letter to the Russian president at the time, Boris Yeltsin. And in the letter, he was like, "Hey man, we're sick of finding your subs in our waters. You gotta stop. Please just stop." But Boris Yeltsin's like, "What are you talking about? We're not over there. All our subs are here. You're crazy." And so the mystery continues until about 1996, when these two men, their names are Magnus Wahlberg and Hakan Westerberg, they're experts in underwater biological sounds. They get a phone call from the military, and they're basically saying, "Hey, now we require your expertise to investigate these Soviet sub noises." And so they ask them to be part of this super secret committee. So they accept the position. They take a train down to Stockholm, and where they're taken to this super secret naval base. Like it's something out of a James Bond or Mission Impossible movie. The entrance to the base are rocks that open up that let the boat in. They're taken down these long, winding tunnels to the secret base where there's all these fancy gadgets and like something out of NASA. And so they sit them at this table that's also filled with very important military personnel people. And they tell them that they're going to be the first civilians to ever listen to this noise, this famous secret noise that the Soviet subs make. And so they play it for them. And how it's described, it's like if 10 Donald Ducks were positioned 100 yards away. That's how they describe it, or like sizzling bacon. It's a very odd sound. And so the military people turn to them like, "Hey, we want you to figure out what makes this noise." And so when they return home, they come up with the hypothesis that, well, an animal must be making this noise. And so what they do is they go to a fish market and they buy some dead Baltic herrings. They're very typical fish in those parts. And what they do is they take it and they put it underwater and they squeeze it. And they record the noise that it makes. And the noise that it makes is identical to the noise that the Soviet subs were making. So what happens is when herrings communicate with one another, they squeeze air from their swim bladder through their anus. So essentially, they're farting. So these scientists found out within a matter of a few days that for 15 years, the Swedish military were just recording noises of schools of fish farting. And the reason I share this story with you today, because again, it's not a major event that happens in history, but it is quite funny, and it did happen during this time. Um, so, yeah, I just thought I'd share that with you. Thank you.
That was 9:43.
No question that well.